welcome to my kitchen. We're going to make sourdough bread today, and I'm going to be using a new recipe for a drier starter that I've never even heard of before a couple days ago. So this is my first time, and I'm happy to have you join me and see how it turns out. And if you'd like to keep receiving notifications as I post new videos, I'm trying for twice a week. Feel free to hit the subscribe button down below, the notification bell that will give you the option to choose all notifications, and then you won't miss any. So today we are going to bake sourdough. I know I've already got a video on there about sourdough, but I'm actually using a new recipe that I found on YouTube, and I will link that channel at the end of the video. That video so that you can watch it if you're interested. This recipe is using a different method for your starter. So typically your starter, most recipes have like a 1:1:1 ratio. So 100 grams of starter, 100 grams of water, and 100 grams of flour. And that is normally how you mix it together and let that ferment and become really active, and then use some of that in your bread. This is called a dry starter. It's not dehydrated dry. It just uses way less starter, way less water, and more flour. And you will find all the details in the video or as I go along. I'm really hoping it works out. Because the problem with the other starters, you always have to have discard. If you're not baking, you have to keep discarding some of that starter, adding more flour and water. And there are things you can do with that discard, and I have used it quite a bit. But it gets, you know, you go through a lot of flour and it's more money. And this, hang on, this is now the starter I will keep. And every time you make bread, you pinch off 30 grams of this, which is approximately a tablespoon. And when you get down to your last 10 or 20 grams, then you feed it. So you can make, like, theoretically, according to that video, 4 or 5 loaves of bread before you have to feed this starter again. So you're feeding it less. It is working well so far. I will show you where I've got so far. But anyway, this is my first time making bread with it. Why I decide to do things for the first time on video when I have no idea how it's going to turn out or anything is beyond me. I also do the same thing when I'm cooking. I can't tell you how many times I make a brand new recipe that I've never tried before when we're having company. In fact, one time, and it was years ago, before Glenn and I ever met. I was first starting to cook, and I had invited people over to my apartment, and I had round steak all cut up in a slow cooker, and I had put, you know, water, like I fried it first to brown it, put water on, onions, that kind of thing. I was going to do like a Swiss steak sort of thing. And so it was in my slow cooker, and about halfway through the afternoon, or just before it was supposed to be ready, I went out just to check on it, and I decided it needed pepper. So I went to put the pepper in, and the lid fell off the shaker, and a whole pile of pepper went in that. And I thought, oh my gosh, now what do I do? Like, I got all these people. Thankfully, nobody even saw. They were still in the living room. So I thought, what do you do? So I scooped out as much of the pepper as I could, stirred the rest in, thickened it, called it pepper steak, and everybody loved it. So all that to say, you can redeem situations, you can turn something into something else. And if this bread doesn't turn out, I'll just let you know right now, it's going to end up as croutons or breadcrumbs. But hopefully it will work. Let's get started. So I started with the starter yesterday, my 30 grams of starter. I put in the 120 grams of water and 130 grams of flour, and mixed it up, and that's called your levain or your leaven. And then I've let this sit overnight. And now it only said like 6 to 10 hours is what's required, but it is good for up to 24. And I wasn't going to bake bread at 11 o'clock last night. So I don't know if you can see, but it is active. You can see all the bubbles And that means this is active and ready to rise bread. So I'm going to change the camera angle and show you what I'm doing next. So I'm going to take this leaven and I'm going to put it in my bowl. And you use it all. So yeah, how many recipe fails have you rescued? Because I'm sure we all have them. And sometimes you just have to throw it out. It just depends what you've done. So to this, in her written recipe, I'm not sure how this is going to go. It's not really helping my cause, only because in the ingredients it said 215 grams of water, and in the instructions it said 315. So I'm going to put 215 to start. And I love using my scale. This is one I got from Pampered Chef. It's a digital scale. And I can tell you, it makes your cooking so much more accurate, especially when you're working with flour, because if it calls for 1 cup of flour and that cup of flour is supposed to weigh 130 grams, if I take a cup of flour out of my bin, and I know they say you should spoon it in, level it off, I still get way more in grams than it should be. So I'm going to tare my scale back to 0. And I'm using warm water. And in order to get the warm water, I could use my tap water because we're on a well, but we also have a water softener that's connected, and I do not want that in my bread. So our cold water is not running through that softener because I can't drink that, and I won't drink that. But however, I want it warmer than that. So I just added some water that we boiled in the kettle to bring it up to a warm temperature. So I'm going to go with 215 grams of water. I've got 215 grams of water. I'm going to add it to my levain. I'm thinking it's really going to be the 315 I need, but again, I can always add more. And I'm just going to use my Danish dough whisk to mix that up before I add my flour. Now I want 600 grams of flour, and I'm using all-purpose today, so I'm putting that back to 0 on my scale, and I'm going to add 600 grams of flour. If this turns out, the next time I'm going to take some of this flour and use rye flour, because I love rye sourdough, but for today, we're just gonna play it safe. There we go. 600. And it was 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay, so I'm just going to go back now and mix this together and see if I think I need that other 100 grams of water. The next time I do this, I also want to try using my stand mixer to mix it, because this is my shoulder that I hurt, and it really, even with this dough whisk, which makes it so much easier, it's still, yeah, I think that needs the 100 grams. I'm going to put that extra 100 grams of water in. On the video she said 3, excuse me, in the instructions it said 3, but in her written instructions, but in the ingredient list it said 200, so 215. So I wasn't sure. Yeah, I definitely needed that 100. So I'm just going to bring this all into a dough. Guys, I really think this is how Gordon Ramsay chops so fast. He just speeds up his video. The cool thing about sourdough is I have learned so much about flour and working with flour that never really had to know before. You're going to see part of the process, and what I'm going to do now, I've got this kind of mixed together, is how it changes. Flour the counter a little bit. That's actually more than I intended, so I'm going to push that to the side so I can. I'm going to pull this dough out. And just kind of push it together into a solid mass. Because the next few steps I'm going to use at 15-minute intervals and about 3 times is called a stretch and fold. And this dough right now has no stretch whatsoever. If I was to pull this apart, it doesn't give any resistance, it just comes apart. And it kind of replaces or mimics the kneading that gets done in a typical yeast bread. So I'm just bringing this all into a ball so that it's not falling apart. And if I hadn't put that extra 100 grams of water in, it would not have held together at all, because definitely needed that. And I'm just going to put this back in the bowl and I'm going to let it rest for 15 minutes. And you will be surprised, even in that time, it's hard because you can't feel it, but I'm sure you'll even see a bit of a difference. So I'm just going to let that rest. I'm going to cover it, and I'll be back to show you the stretch and fold. Okay, so the dough's now rested for 15 minutes. I covered it, and I use these plastic kind of shower cap things so that I can reuse them over and over. I hate buying plastic wrap. I hate throwing it away when I'm done. And so yeah, that's what I use, and it works great. So there is a difference already in this dough. I'm just going to get my scraper. This is another product that I got from Pampered Chef, and it's been a lifesaver. So this is my bowl scraper. So it has a square edge and a round edge, and it's soft silicone on the outside. So it really helps to get all the dough out. This is my bench scraper, and you'll see me using it when we're folding the dough, and it helps to scrape it up when it starts to stick on the counter, because sourdough is more sticky than regular bread. Just going to take this out of the bowl. There we go. Flour my hands a little bit. Now, right away, you can see this has more stretch, and that's only sat for 15 minutes. As the dough sits, the flour absorbs more of the water, and the gluten starts to relax and form. So I'm just going to shape it just to make sure this is all kind of uniform. Some parts feel a little drier than others, so I just want to make sure all the flour and water are combined evenly. Okay. So stretching and folding is very simple. And all you're doing is taking one side and folding it onto itself and pushing down. Turn it to the other side. As it gets stretchier, it will stretch out more the next few times we do this. And this seems like a fussy step. I find it kind of therapeutic, but it really does help with the final outcome of your bread. And so that's all I'm going to do this time. Just once around, and I'm going to put it back in the bowl, and I'm going to let it sit for another 15 minutes. And we're going to do this 3 times. Sorry, this camera angle's not great. But it is starting to feel much more springy and more like a bread dough. Cover it again with my little shower cap thing, and in 15 minutes we will be back to do it again. Okay, we're continuing on with the stretch and folds. I'm actually going to do this 3 more times. I actually like doing it, so I added an extra round. You're going to notice each time the dough stretches way more when I first start to do the stretch and folds. As I do it a few times, go around the circle, you can see the dough starts to tighten up, and that's common, and that's kind of what you're trying to achieve. You're strengthening the gluten in the dough. But now I also realize why I used to have so much trouble with my pizza crust trying to get them rolled out, because I never took the time to let the dough rest the 15 minutes it usually said before rolling it out. And I see that I've caused myself mega extra frustration and time. So from now on, I let my pizza crust dough rest before I try and roll it out into the pizza shape. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the rest of the video. There's still a bit more here. Don't miss any. And don't miss any of my videos if you're enjoying them. Please click subscribe down below. Hit the notification bell so that you get all notifications. You'll have to select that. And yeah, let's learn together. This was brand new for me today. I really like this recipe. I can tell already it's going to simplify my sourdough baking, cut down on the cost of trying to keep starters alive. It's just, I really, really like this recipe. I'm going to link it at the end. You'll see a link for the video that I watched so that you too can benefit from that same knowledge. It's the Elliott Homestead is the channel, and yes, this has been life-changing for me. So enjoy, and the results did turn out. I'm not eating croutons. I'm actually going to have bread. Okay guys, so I actually did this 4 times, the stretch and fold, and now my dough is proofed. And if you look at it, I know you can't see, but I can see that there are bubbles in this dough. So now it's time to pre-shape it. So I'm going to put it out on my counter. And like the texture of this dough compared to when I started is truly amazing. It has totally transformed from what would have been comparable to a pie crust dough, like loose and clumpy. I don't know if you can see, there's kind of like bubbles around. So now what I'm doing is I'm not trying to get rid of those bubbles. I want to keep some of them. And I'm just getting it ready. See, like, I don't know if you can see this. It's huge, again with the light. There's a huge air bubble right there and here. So I'm just pulling and turning. And that's going to tighten this dough. And you want it tight because that's what gives you oven spring when you're cooking it. And as I do this, there's all these bubbles coming to the surface, which is really cool and good to see. And I'm not wanting to overwork this dough. I'm just shaping it. I'm not kneading it. I'm not pushing on it. I'm twisting and turning and tightening the outside layer of the dough. And I have to say, I had told you this was a new recipe, and so far it is the best sourdough that I've worked with so far. So if the bread turns out, then this is a winner. And I recommend, if you're interested in sourdough at all, that you start here. Then if you want to start working with wetter doughs, which seems to be like a badge of honor in the sourdough world, then increase your moisture bit by bit. I would still use the same starter. I would just put maybe more water in the dough. Because like some of these people are making sourdoughs out of stuff that makes a pancake dough look thick. And I am not into mess everywhere and whatever. And they like, the reason they do it, honestly, is because it produces apparently a really open crumb, which means when you slice into the bread, you see lots and lots of big air holes. Well, that's great, except when you put your butter on, or your peanut butter, or whatever you're putting on it, where does it go? It falls through the holes. So this I'm just pre-shaping. Well, actually it is shaping. I don't think there's another step before this. Just getting this dough ready to go in my Banneton. And I'm just going to twist and twist and twist to tighten up that seam that's on the bottom now that has formed from me pulling and turning. And I'm tightening that up because it gives more structure to the dough. Anyway, I don't know all the details, but it matters. Now I have a Banneton, and I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're like a bamboo, cotton-lined bowl. And you don't have to use that. People use a colander with a dish towel in it, and I'm just flouring it quite liberally so that my dough doesn't stick. And I'm placing this bread dough now in the Banneton, upside down, and I can see that that seam has tight, it's sealed. It's not, there's no big gaps, there's no big openings, and that helps the dough to rise up and out better. So I'm going to leave this now for an hour. I'm going to cover it just like before, and I'm going to preheat my Dutch oven in a hot oven at about 475. And then in an hour, we're going to bake this. And then we'll see if this has been a success or a royal failure. And whether I eat bread, actually I'm not going to eat much of this, but bread or I make croutons. This might be the best croutons anybody's ever had. So let's see in an hour. So the dough has risen for an hour and my Dutch oven has been preheating during that time. This pan is really hot, be careful. When you put the dough in, I just dump it in quick and then I begin to score the top of the dough to give the dough a place to rise through, so you're not getting blowouts and bubbles out the side, and it really does help for a better rise. It's going in at 475 for 30 minutes with the lid on and about 15 minutes with the lid off until it gets as brown as you want. It turned out really good. I'm really happy with this recipe. I will put the link to the video I watched at the end of this. Please check it out.